Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to Speakin' My Piece, hosted by Dekel Bor and presented by Jazz Times in association with Rope-A-Dope. My name is Louis Marks. I'm here at the Rope-A-Dope room just outside Philadelphia. And if you're new to the show, Dekel Bor sits down with some of the most amazing and finest musicians on the planet and chops it up about technique, motivation, and life in 2020. Dekel Bor has performed with jazz legends Johnny Griffin, Reggie Workman, Pat Martino, Billy Hart, and many more. His new album, Let Love Rule, was released this year on Rope-A-Dope and is available at dekelbor.bandcamp.com. Today we have the great pleasure of welcoming a native New Yorker and the guitarist of choice for many in so many different circles, Mr. Adam Rogers. He has, the list is so long, but I'll name just a few of the few that are named on his website. Michael Brecker, Joe Jackson, Cassandra Wilson, Chris Potter, John Zorn, Joe Locke, Eddie Palmieri. And just those names alone tell you the range of styles and the circles in which he's traveled. He is also one-third of Dice with Fema Efren and Nate Smith, no strangers to the Rope-A-Dope roster. He is on a couple of those albums, on the Fema Efren Songs from the Tree, on the Nate Smith Kinfolk record, which was nominated for 2 Grammys, and also on Fork back in the day. Here's a quote from the New York Times. Easily one of the best jazz guitarists in New York, the next step in the tradition of swinging mainstream players in the lineage of Pat Martino and George Benson. That's the New York Times. So without further ado, I'm going to change things around here. We're going to go straight to Berlin and speak to Mr. Dekel Bor. Dekel, how are you?
Louis, this is going to be a good one.
Oh, yeah.
Louis he was probably referring to other episode where we talk about technique, life, inspiration. This very special episode is about love and admiration, not only my own. I don't remember any episode we had any guest either on this channel or the Shure channel that a guest stirred this kind of commotion, this many questions coming in. Too many people keep replying, he's my favorite guitarist, he's my favorite artist. But if I put fandom aside for a minute, there's a group of us guys in the same kind of age that grew up together in different schools or different cliques in New York that are kind of tight. Miles Okazaki is one, Matthew Stevens is another, and I don't think there's anyone that we speak about with this level of respect, and this includes any guitarist that probably ever lived, except for Charlie Christian. I mean, I don't think there's anyone that we keep mentioning the kind of admiration and the kind of the word respect keeps coming to mind as much as we mention the name Adam Rogers. And I mean, but if I put all that aside, if I can put all that, the musical greatness aside, if I can put the amount of gigs that I went as a fan, as a student, with kind of being too shy to even say Adam. If I put all that aside, his humility and speaks, I mean, there's almost the stories that I could tell you that I don't know, I'm not sure you'll be comfortable with, of just the kind of person he is he's really a role model for so many of us. So without further ado, the one and only Adam Rogers. Adam, I'm just so happy to see you.
Happy to see you too, Dekel.
Have you been?
I've been good. Yeah, thank you for the stellar introduction. I appreciate it very much.
I've been practicing it all month. So, with all this free time that we have on our hands this year, any few albums that you could share that you've been checking out as a fan that kept you inspired?
Wow, boy, too many to recount, actually. Boy, where should I start? Muddy Waters folk singer.
Yeah.
Whole bunch of Chet Atkins records I've been checking out. I Miles in the Sky I listen to regularly. I just got a nice pressing of that.
Which pressing are we talking about?
I got an original 60s pressing of Miles in the Sky in good condition. So oftentimes when I'll get a record like that, it'll just give me an extra reason to listen to it because I'm a sound audiophile nerd.
Yeah,
But
I've been spending this past weekend trying out different pressings of McCoy Tyner with my girlfriend and looking at her. How come you're not hearing the difference?
yeah.
And she's looking at me like I'm out of my mind, and how how she can exit the relationship.
What else? I mean, man, I listen to so much different music, a whole bunch of Van Halen, before and after Eddie's untimely passing.
What was it like to be 14-year-old or 12 years old and you're already playing, and he's like, and you hear that sound and that audacity?
I never listened to them when I was young at all. And it's not I totally love Van Halen, but I was, when I started playing, I was part of the Hendrix generation, and I just sort of, like, I listened to Jimmy constantly, and then when I got into try to learn how to play bebop, I just stopped listening to all rock. So
I'm gonna make sure this is recorded to hear Adam Rogers say trying to learn to play bebop. I want to have this on file. But since you already brought up Jimmy, how it took many years, because I know you to be like, I don't think I know anyone that has that spirit and they're playing in an authentic way except for you and Mike McCready. I don't know. But what took so long for you to kind of bring it out to the public?
I don't know. It just that music. You're referring to Dice.
Yeah, absolutely referring to Dice.
I prior to making my first jazz record, the Art of the Invisible, I think it was the one prior to Allegory. I had this group, as you may know, called Lost Tribe.
Yeah.
Where we were playing.
Did I ever tell you my Lost Tribe story?
No.
I was 17. I went to New York to take some lessons with guys. Went from Tel Aviv, and Yossi Fine kept telling me, there's this guy you have to hear. There's two guys, Fusinski and Rogers, and they have a band. And it's Lost Tribe and Headless Screaming Torsos. I don't think I could even pronounce it at the time.
Right.
But these are the guys that you gotta locate. And and he gave me your number. And you are already, touring constantly. I just kind of tried to. I got in touch with FEMA and I got in touch with Fusinski, but I couldn't locate you yet. But I got the CD.
Okay.
And I would wear it out.
That's so cool.
What a band.
Yeah.
And since that band, I'm like the biggest Porowski fan on the planet.
He's a bad dude. Yeah. So, that was sort of in that electric mold, what I was focused on prior to doing the first acoustic jazz record, or however you'd want to describe it. And then, when the first, whatever they are, 4 or 5 records I did were all in that, I was working along those lines and exploring that.
It's not just 4 and 5, because you're also recording heavily as a sideman.
Yes, as a leader.
Mother, really.
Yeah. And at some point, I think, I guess.
So I'm pulling you back a second. I'm sorry. I'm going to keep interrupting you because I'm too curious. So Art of the Invisible came about right around the Brecker gig, more or less.
Yeah, I recorded that a couple years after I started playing with Mike.
And this was one of those I remember we had like a moment, like the day that, it was probably a week or two after that came out, where everyone in New York kept talking about, in 1 week, I think 11 people told me about that album. Wow. It was unbelievable. I can name you the guys. You know those guys. And it was like a thing for us. I mean, it was almost like, I don't remember a reaction like this, except for hearing probably Wes for the first time and Matheny for the first time. I mean, I don't remember a reaction that I had like that, and everyone around me.
Thank you, Dekel. That's undeserving, I think, but thank you.
Well, you could, let's do the blushing session later. But what kind of preparation went in, except for 20 years of musicianship? I mean, this was the quartet with Ed and Clarence and Scott.
Right.
And you guys gigged before this? The tunes, I mean, are pretty extensive.
Yeah. I mean, we had, God, I don't really remember exactly. We did, as is typical for records like that, a little bit of rehearsal, but we had been playing in various versions of that group for a long time. I mean, I had played with Scott and Clarence and Ed a tremendous amount individually or in other people's groups prior to that record. And Clarence and I had been playing with Mike quite a bit. And I think Scott maybe started playing with Mike a little after that. Anyway, there was a lot of familiarity in a lot of different ways leading up to that record. Scott had been playing some of those tunes since I wrote them, like in the late 90s, I think. So there wasn't that much preparation right before making that record. Wasn't really necessary. I mean, they're all extraordinary musicians. So I got everybody the music and we rehearsed and went in and did it. But there was a familiarity that was there, sort of built up from the years prior to making that first record.
So what happened between Out of the Invincible to Allegory, as far as composition, as far as band leading, as far as, because when, for me and for a lot of my friends, Allegory kind of started a chain of what to me is a very, very rare and almost never spoken about. It's one of the very few great quintets led by a guitarist.
Thank you.
And it really is a quintet. You write for the guys. You obviously write for them specifically. Each one has a part. No one is doubling. You know what I mean.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what was the process? Because I can sing that album by heart.
That's cool. There was not much conscious about it, Dekel. You know, I just wrote music for that group, for those particular musicians. You know, once I know that I'm going to be working with a particular group of musicians with regard to their particular musical personalities and with regard to the amount of parts I can write, you know.
If you had more guys, you would write more parts for the same tunes?
Depends. I mean, some, you know, that depends. But I do, you know, when the way that I write for quintet and for quartet is somewhat different because I'll end up writing contrapuntal melodic lines in addition to the, you know, somewhat involved piano stuff that I also like to write, which usually, you know, the lower hand is doubled with the bass.
Yeah.
And then the guitar and the saxophone will either play something in unison or, as is probably pretty obvious to you, I'll write contrapuntal lines.
And another question, do you find yourself writing mostly the piano, mostly the guitar, a little bit of both?
So many different ways, man, you know. I mean, it really depends. I get inspiration from a kind of a number of different settings. But composition to me, I was telling someone the other day, it almost feels like warfare. It's like any possible way that I can come up with something, like if it involves throwing a slinky against the wall and recording it and bird song. I mean, it's
this is
because
priceless. This is priceless.
It's oftentimes, it's such a, I mean, rare times that I'll just play something and I mean, it's probably happened 2 times in my life that I sat down and I wrote a tune from beginning to end and I went, oh, that sort of works.
Really?
Yes.
'Cause
Usually,
I was thinking that tunes like was they have this arc to them. I was thinking that that would be
I think one of them that actually happened without much thought and you know, belabored revisiting. But most of my tunes,
I'm getting the super fan badge, man, just for this. But
most stuff that I write, you know, there'll be a part of a tune that's kind of purely inspired or comes out of inspiration and like, oh, that's nice, but it's rarely the entire tune that happens like that. That tune, I oftentimes recount it. That tune Absalom from my first
yeah.
record, the A section I wrote sometime in the, I guess like 1997 or something. And it's, I think it was about 2 years later, I came up with a B section that I liked, and I would revisit it regularly.
I
And
think
part of it
I've
is
been
that
to a
I
gig.
feel that like, if I write something that I like or that elicits a strong feeling from me, which is basically what I'm looking for in any music, and I'm no different. I mean, the way that I judge my own music is no differently. If I feel strongly about something I write, the rest of the tune, let's say if it's an A section, I have to feel that way about whatever else
To
I
adhere
write.
to the
Right. So
yeah.
I know I'm not unique in that. It's just if I establish some level of relative quality, it's like, you know, okay, let me try this. No, that doesn't really do it for me. So I'll wait, you know.
I think I've been to a gig of yours before we kind of met that Harlan was playing and
Hmm.
Chris, it was a quartet. I think it was 55. And he introduced me to you afterwards. I think I was kind of like too starstruck to even kind of really speak to you. But and you played Absalom, and I think it was a different version than one on the album.
Hmm.
I think.
It's possible. Yeah. I don't recollect that, but you know, but suffice to say that for me, oftentimes there'll be something that I come up with compositionally that I like, and then oftentimes the rest of it will be a lot of experimentation and auditioning things. I mean, I've written 5 sections to tunes that, you know,
You
get
get
thrown
used.
out, you know. So
Yeah. And another question about composition. Do you write with an instrument, pen and paper, or do you go through the Pro Tools route, the looping route?
I use a number of different things. Sometimes I don't actually have a piano here, but I have access to piano. So sometimes I'll just write on piano. Sometimes I write on guitar. You know, a lot of times I'll use Pro Tools just to put parts in and sort of create textures that are fun and inspiring to work with. I have a pretty elaborate small studio setup at home. So if I have an idea for something that feels like a, you know, a nice vamp or some idea that I know I could use to listen to and then experiment with ideas over, I'll record it in some fashion into Pro Tools. And then, you know, like oftentimes what I'll do is just improvise either on guitar, or I have this funny wind organ from the 50s, which is like basically an electric accordion without the bellows. And for some reason, the sound on that thing kind of elicits some
Something, yeah.
good from me. So I'll just play, you know, like in Pro Tools, like playlist after play, you know, like 15 takes of just improvising. And I'll listen to all of them and I'll see if anything, you know, pops out. And
Echoes, yeah.
sometimes I'll take something like that and then go, oh, that's cool, and then mold it or add to it, or, you know, as I said, oftentimes it's like any technique I can find to surprise myself, basically, to come up with something that is sort of unfamiliar and interesting to me. So that usually happens on another instrument. than my own, you know, like I don't know why that is, if my fingers want to go to certain places, but I can usually find things that are unfamiliar and unexpected a little easier if I'm like sitting on a keyboard instrument kind of hacking away. You know, sometimes I'll write stuff that's sort of almost unplayable because I'll write it on another instrument and then go, oh, this will
Right,
be cool.
right.
And, you know, anyway, but
So a couple other questions about that quintet. I mean, I've seen you guys play a lot. I think mostly when people ask me about you or about your influence on me, I think they often go for the ferociousness of your playing, and there's something grander than life about you. But I always say that one of the greatest moments I've ever witnessed in music was you playing a Jobim. I think it was either Portrait in Black or White or Zingaro. Da, dee,
oh
dee,
yeah,
dee,
yeah, yeah.
da, da. Like I've seen you play that live, and I was just on the floor. And there's another unbelievable moment that's recorded, a tune of you called Persephone,
Oh yeah.
that I think it's just an historic, almost for me, it's an historic moment. Something that I try to, anytime I play acoustic or a ballad or in the studio, I'm playing anytime I'm trying to, it's quite a landmark.
Thank you.
So how did that quintet kind of evolve in your journey before Dice?
Gee, I mean, we didn't really do that much. We did a few gigs at the gallery and the Standard and stuff, and those two records. It always feels like we did a lot more work because I've played so much
Yeah.
with all of those guys. I mean, Chris and Ed and Scott and Clarence in so many different iterations of other people's groups and their groups. And
Yeah, yeah. I don't
so,
know if you know this, but I would drive your bandmates crazy with questions about you. I mean, Clarence, we would play a gig and I would ask him like the most, like a teenager kind of questions. Does Adam practice at the hotel or or backstage before how much does he practice? And he would he would look at me like, what do you want, man? I mean, everyone, and it was the same for Donnie McCaston, the same for Benny. I would ask so many questions about you, and it was Boris Kozlov, Antonio. It was really, it was kind of always amazing for me to see the kind of reverence people have for you. That includes Mike Marciano, Vic Juris. I mean, it's really unbelievable.
that's nice to hear, man. Thanks for saying.
Uh,
Yeah, I mean, that quintet, you know, I don't know if I have a really sort of objective way of describing it. You know, we just, those first couple of albums, then we did some work a few years later. And as I said, it feels like that group of musicians, there's so many
yeah.
veins. It's almost like, you know, the progression of that group as it was is so related to my own life as a human being, because they're also all good friends of mine. So I don't know how to describe it exactly. It evolved in the way that we all have as people and as friends and musicians. And
That's beautifully said. I think the relationship with Chris is very, very well documented. But there's an incredible Clarence Payne album that you sound unbelievable on called Dali in Cobble Hill.
yeah.
And also Chris sounds amazing on it. But in generally speaking, I always felt that you and Clarence have this thing. I mean, I don't think there's almost no one except Brecker that I want to hear his Clarence play like that.
Yeah, I have always felt that Clarence and I have had I mean, I love his playing, and I feel like that I learned a lot about playing music, playing with him, both by virtue of playing with him and also by virtue of the musical projects we were a part of.
Yeah.
Maybe most notably playing with Brecker together, you know, which was a kind of a celebratory event for everybody involved.
For the whole community.
Yeah.
But before I go to Brecker, so Then you did a couple of albums. There's one with a couple of trio albums.
Yeah.
Both of them are, I hear so many people kind of describe them as their reference point for trio playing. And it's kind of amazing again to hear you with Clarence and Patitucci. But then kind of Dice came out, and if someone, except for the ones that kind of would check you at the 55 and see that thing evolve, and obviously the band with Chris kind of show that side of you more and more. But that album is just, it's a wild ride, man. It's unbelievable.
Thanks.
And anything you want to share about it, the process of kind of going back into Jimmy, of kind of picking up the solid body more and more. And I know that you had a lot of you tried a lot of cats at the 55 playing that music, and it really kind of came together in the most homogenic, natural way. And
yeah, well, actually, I didn't. I mean, when I wrote that, most of the music, certainly the music that's on the record, I wrote in sort of a flurry of activity. I got really inspired to write a bunch of music for that setting, what some describe as a power trio. And there was never 1 second where I had any doubt about who would be playing it. Fima and Nate were, when I started writing that music, I was like, yes, Fima and Nate. I wrote it for them, basically. So
how long do you and Ephraim go back? I mean,
mid 80s, we met, I think, like in 84, 85, and
wow.
have just done, I mean, an incredible amount of playing together with Lost Tribe. And we used to play in local funk pop bands, and we played on the street, and I mean, long time.
There was a period in New York when someone could walk down the street and hear you and Fima Ephraim play. I mean, that's
long, man, all day long. We used to play 3 sets a day on the street.
wow. Who was the drummer? Borowski?
In that group, it was a really, really great drummer, and probably my oldest friend in the world, whose name is Zach Alford. Zach played with Bowie, Springsteen. Yeah, incredible groove pocket player. And then I used to play with other people. I played on the street in the mid 80s for probably 4 or 5 years, constantly.
But before we go there, I want to let people know that Fima has an unbelievable album on Rope-a-Dope they should really check out. It's an amazing album that I don't hear talked about as much as I would like to, because he's not the publicist musician type.
Oh, definitely not. It's Songs from the Tree, I believe. Yeah. It's a really nice record.
Yeah.
Anyway, but so I wrote all the music for Dice, as I said, sort of in this flurry. I was listening to a lot of Hendrix and blues music, like I have my whole life. But we were playing quite a bit with Chris Potter at that time, Nate and Fima and myself, Chris's underground group. And I think that particular experience playing with them at that time, along with these other inspirations, just got me going on sort of hearing this thing. And also, I think, Oz Noy, your amazing fellow countryman. I think I heard Oz one night at the bitter end, and I mean, Oz is an amazing musician and guitarist, and I was like, right, power trio, like you don't need anything else.
Yeah.
Like the way Oz plays and the way he writes for his band, it's like a complete sound, and it's instrumental. So I was inspired by hearing him in terms of the what's the word? The fact that you can play an instrumental with an instrumental power trio and have it all. The only thing is that writing for Dice is in a way a lot more challenging for me than writing for a quintet or quartet, because it's an unforgiving situation. And I mean that in that there's I mean, if you think about my quartet, trio, quintet, straight ahead records, like none of that I would really play with Dice. None of it. For one thing, there's only 3 instruments. And also there's a certain sound that I hear with a trio like Dice that I sort of want to maintain, if this makes any sense. Like there's a
Absolutely.
certain level of energy. There's a certain way. I've probably written way more tunes for Dice than we actually played more than once. Because there's a certain kind of, I don't know exactly how to say it, like physicality or something to the music, where if the tune doesn't sort of bear up under that
Yeah.
approach or respond, then it just goes by the wayside. So,
And I think people don't always realize how unforgiving the guitar trio is. I mean, it's not the most. A guitar doesn't give you the expansiveness of a keyboard or a piano, and it doesn't give you the huge dynamic range and the power that a saxophone has
right.
in a trio, which is what most of us kind of associate with a trio. And it's not a very there hasn't been a lot of successful trios in artistically for me, but
Mhm.
you guys, it's an unbelievable album. It's really unbelievable.
Thank you.
It also brings a lot of textures from you that I'm not always used to hearing,
Right.
and a lot of subtleties that I think all of us started in the phrasing, that you kind of take more time with, all those little bends that little things, the way you kind of play with the time. It's maybe it's a little more obvious.
With
And
as you may be able to relate to, with that sound, I mean, the difference between my, however you want to call it, like straight ahead sound or my ES335 and the sound that I use when I'm playing with a Stratocaster with an amp that's overdriving, I end up working more with just the sound as a sort of improvisational tool, if that makes any sense.
absolutely.
So, and it's by design, when I started really focusing on playing the 335, not to get too nerdy, it was, after years of playing a solid body with more overdrive, and I wanted to really kind of remove a lot of what I felt was extraneous to a certain thing that I wanted to focus on, which was notes and rhythms and chords, like less about guitar sound and more. And that's what I felt and continue to feel very strongly when I play with that instrument and in a certain style. But as soon as I start playing a Strat or a Tele where there's this different kind of thing, I start playing more with the sound, maybe in a way that's more like what saxophonists are able to do, sort of investigating the deep tonal palette of the instrument. And I go like this because I think about it as like a thing that goes kind of like a well, and with the Strat or the Telecaster and certain kinds of amps, when you play a note, you can hear this thing respond in a way that, at least for me, makes me want to, as soon as I hear that sound, I go, oh man, oh, let me like do that again, or let me pull on the string to see if it'll go deeper. And then I start working with things that are almost like, it's almost like I'm just working with sound, less than
Absolutely.
than chord changes and things. And I mean, I think it's for organic reasons, but most of the music with Dice, it's all like one chord vamps. I think if there's if there's a sort of overarching reason for that, it's because I want to kind of just explore sound and rhythm in a simple, sort of overtly simple context that allows us to go deeper into just the sound of a note and the feeling of a rhythm.
I think you're again, you're being way too humble about this, for a couple of reasons. I'm one of those guys that I'm kind of the happiest. Just give me an acoustic guitar. I kind of don't need the rest in a way. If I wouldn't have to play gigs for people or for myself, or
Right.
with the rhythm section, but and I know you can relate, but And actually, if we speak about Oz Noy, if there's any guy in the world that makes you want to go to a guitar store and try things out, is Oz. But I almost always feel that when people use an overdriven sound, you stop hearing the personality. I mean, for me as a fan, when people have an overdrive, all of a sudden, everybody almost, I'm exaggerating a little, but everybody almost sounds the same.
Right.
And it's kind of amazing to hear you bring a real voice to that landscape. I mean, because for my money, almost no one has it except for, Schofield. I don't know who.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I think part of that might, I'm reluctant to say, but part of that might be pedals.
I was sure you would say this.
Oh,
I actually asked you about that in before we kind of went online, just because I could hear that it's coming from the amp.
voice. There's an, not to go too guitar crazy, but I was talking to somebody else about this, one of my students. I mean, for me, when I hear the sound of overdrive, I attack the instrument differently. It changes the way that I play. So I never play with the same kind of attack, like with my pick, that I use with my 335 with the clean sound when I play a Strat. I just don't, it changes my entire sort of like all the
Absolutely,
tolerances.
absolutely.
And I'm not saying that I'm unique in that, but I think if you create an overdrive sound for yourself and you don't really play with that sound, it's almost like it can put a sort of a mask over the nuance of your attack, I think.
Yeah.
You know?
I absolutely agree. I have a lot more to ask you, but I will tell people this, anyone who's watching, that the Dice album is just outrageous, and I encourage everyone to buy the CD like I just did a few days ago, because I can imagine that streaming kills so much of the guitar and the drums and the whole thing, and I know that Adam I can imagine that you put in, oh, there it is. So this is the album. Is it on Bandcamp, Adam? How do people get it?
It's on Bandcamp, and it's on this very small digital device.
So the reason I'm bringing this up is because bass, guitar, and drums, they don't react well to streaming and to downgrading the sound to the point of, I don't know what. So this album is an amazing way to hear this. There's also a tune, I think it's called Train, third tune on the Chris Potter Live at the Vanguard album, that you play the most incredible I don't want to say overdriven, but it's not a clean sound on a ballad that is just, if you're a lover of music, you want to hear this. So we have the thing that I started doing. I'm going to ask you about some albums that I think have a thing for you. We never talked about this to anyone who's watching, but so usually I bring up one, but I brought up a few because I think they have a thing for you. I don't have transition. So I brought the Vanguard. This is a Japanese pressing. I brought Meditation. I'm including McCoy because I want to hear you talk about McCoy, but I'm kind of putting this up. This is the Africa Brass album.
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine you listening to this and kind of going into the zone of them just playing in a studio and kind of imagine what it was like at the time. And there's a sense of abundance. Is that the right word? Of someone, he flies with so much freedom on that album that I always associate with you. There's always, and there's also a Train Alvin thing that I always think that you kind of always bring to any situation that you play in, that I'd love to hear you talk about.
Well, it's interesting that, I mean, that record, I wore that record out, as we used to say, over and over and over again. And I love every tune on it. I love the arrangements by Dolphy of the big band or whatever, and the two basses. I mean, it's just, that's a remarkable, remarkable record. and Train's sound on it, and where he was right at that period, you know, pretty early on in the Impulse years. And I learned so much from listening to the way he plays on that record, very specifically the beginning of Africa, the way that melody, I believe the tune is in D, and the melody is sort of like in C minor over D. That's in a way sort of how I learned what it was to play polytonally. And the way he starts playing that melody and eventually resolves into D minor is one of the, to me, the great moments in music. It's an inspired record. And Elvin, oh my God, the alternate takes, there's a drum solo on the alternate takes version
on the C,
where Elvin starts doing this shit, man. It's some of the deepest music I've ever heard in my life. I listen to it all the time.
I always thought that what you just described was almost one of the first blueprints for what Wayne did on Speak No Evil. That flat 9 over the tonic, minor tonic. I mean, that was almost for me the first time I heard it so full out. I always thought it was E flat major going to D minor.
Well, I always think of it, and I use it have used it as sort of an example when talking to students about playing outside the changes, because it doesn't sound like, it doesn't have anything to do with D. He's like in C minor.
Yeah.
You know, it's polytonal. It's not like, never heard it as being a D anything. It's like, I'm in C minor and then I resolve, you know what I mean? It's like actual polytonal playing. I mean, it's a simple part of the song because he's basically but he plays this thing that really that brings you to the feeling of C minor over D. Anyway, and just emotionally, it's such a powerful record, and his sound and the way he develops every solo, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, it's and also if you brought up Elvin, then I will say that the couple of times that I got to play with you was only similar to playing with, I don't know, Billy Hart. What you have in your rhythmic, there's a size to your beat that I don't think I've ever experienced. That is,
thanks.
I remember the feeling of standing next to you and hearing it right from the bandstand for the first time. I remember being like, I remember that feeling very distinctly.
Thank you.
I was just like, wow.
Yeah, well, I mean, that anything that I have going on has so much to do with that record, and that period of Train's music, you know, was so meaningful and powerful, and continues to be meaningful and powerful.
And I'm also thinking that McCoy, I'm assuming that's you learned all of, I mean, there's just, it's so, I don't know if people realize how difficult and insanely genius the language of McCoy Tyner is, and to kind of bring that to the guitar is, I don't even have the words, man.
Yeah, well, I really don't. I mean, I know you're going to accuse me of being overly humble, but I don't think I've actually done that. But he was and continues to be a huge influence on me, you know. And I learned, I mean, I would transcribe some McCoy things to have some idea of what he was doing. So much of his influence has been just this sort of osmosis from listening to that group's music so much.
Yeah.
The concept of playing in that sort of same way that I was referring to before, polytonally, you know, and doing so much with the sound of one key, you know, and moving things around, and the way McCoy played with fourths and
that he really opened to. And McCoy Tyner's solo is like hearing the entire galaxy, looking at the entire galaxy.
Yeah,
it's unbelievable. So I'm moving onwards. I wasn't sure what to bring up. I didn't have any real modern on vinyl. It was probably going to be Stravinsky. So I have Karajan play Brahms, and I have this is a real favorite of mine. I'm a huge Kempf guy, huge.
What?
But I brought this up because it's there's something about the writing that I always associate with you, the Ravel writing, and the way that you're able to the life of a melody, and also because it's New York Philharmonic and Bernstein. I'm assuming that your parents were huge Bernstein people.
They were both.
But I will take this Segovia, Scarlatti, Dowland, Toroba. I don't know if you noticed, but um, I had all my, you could test things out at the new school and not having to go through them. So I tested out so much that I didn't know what to do with me in order to let me finish the 4 years. So I did a lot of yoga just so I wouldn't have to do shit. But so I went to 2 years at Manus, and I did mainly speeches counterpoint. And I took lessons with the best guitar teacher in the world. So I go into the first lesson, and the guy's name, he's a legend, is Fred Hand, and he says, "Oh, so you play jazz? I had a jazz student once." And he said, "Well," and I asked, "Who?" And he goes, "Adam Rogers." And I'm like, "Fred, this is going to be an exercise in frustration from you from now onwards. I'm going to be the disappointment. Welcome." So, I don't think this is talked about except for our little circles, but you went through 4 years of super intense classical study from Palestrina to Morton Feldman.
You could say that, yeah.
And first of all, what prompted you wanting to leave the Strat aside and kind of just pick up a classical guitar?
Well, at that point, I was, prior to going to school, I was playing mostly like a hollow body and just playing jazz, trying to learn how to play jazz, which I had been studying for a couple of years, I guess 2 or 3 years in high school. And when I decided that I would go to school for music, I applied to and got accepted into a whole bunch of jazz schools. And I realized in some strange way, looking back on it, because I was sort of young and dumb, that I thought if I studied something that I knew nothing about, that I'd learn a lot more than if I went to a jazz school. Like, I was in New York already since I grew up here, and I was starting to play. And I thought, well, what exactly am I going to learn in a jazz school that I can't learn about jazz sort of on the streets of New York and in clubs, So I decided that I would go to study classical music because I thought I would learn more in a scholastic environment, which was totally the case. I mean, I think 6 months prior to auditioning, I started playing classical guitar, and I learned how to do it pretty fast because I fell in love with Julian Bream. But I decided, I was a strange kid. I decided I was going to try to do it, and I showed up to my first classical guitar lesson with a steel string.
Unbelievable.
And a pick. Like, I just was like, okay, you know what? And my teacher,
where are the chicks? Get me an amp.
Prior to Fred, was a great guitarist named Robert Sechrist, and he said,
yeah,
you have to go get a nylon string and come back next week. But I was really knocked out by, I basically just listened to Julian Bream, playing Villalobos and modern music, and it inspired me to want to learn how to play classical. So
I want to ask you two things. What does that do? What did that do to your experience of bringing out tonal beauty out of a guitar? Because that had to be a huge thing.
Well, I think it had just this sort of general overarching effect on my concept of sound. Whatever sound that I was trying to make, it just be a sort of full realization of itself, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Playing classical requires that you work on your sound, you know, which you produce with your fingernails and on the strings of the classical guitar. It helped me, I think, conceive of whatever sound I was going for in a particular way, and to try to make whatever sound I try to make sound rich and, you know, sort of fully present and fully realized, you know.
I think this goes all throughout the arc of your career, to from Persephone to that tune that I talked about, you playing a Telecaster called, I think it's called Train. I mean, you have that, it's pure beauty. It's so prevalent.
Thank you. I don't, you know, I mean, it certainly hasn't been, it's not the easiest aspiration in the world, because you're constantly sort of chasing something that's a little out of your reach potentially. Every once in a while I get it and I go, okay, that's sort of like really, really what I was hearing. I think in a way, I've never thought about it like this, but playing classical guitar sort of spoils you, because if you can get it at all, if you can get the sound, it's so
It's
incredibly beautiful, you know. Like, it's incredibly hard to do, certainly to play the pieces without, you know, making all of the lousy sounds that a guitar can make, as you know. But I think when you really can connect with it and you get that sound with a rest stroke on a nylon string, man, that is
in a small room, I mean,
Yeah.
you're golden. Yeah.
It's quite an experience. But in a way, it's like, okay, well now, so I'm playing a Stratocaster, and how do you, it's not like I have the sound of a nylon string. It's like, okay, well, you got to come up with your Fender Stratocaster way of playing that. But that notion is always in my head of I'm trying.
Sure. And in your hands, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm not saying that I realize it. I have that thing in my head of like, I hear this sound if it's a perfect, and in a lot of ways I think about the Fender Stratocaster, which is a very, I don't know exactly how to, you know, it's such a stylistically, it's reminiscent of so many specific guitarists who have played Stratocaster. When you hear a Stratocaster, you think of Hendrix, you think of Stevie Ray. To me, a Stratocaster is almost just like the sound of an acoustic piano. It's just a great guitar sound that requires a certain approach to get it to sound beautiful, much in the way
again, you're being a little, you know, I don't think people realize how difficult it is to make a Stratocaster with a loud amp sound, you know, what it can sound like.
I don't mean
make it sound original.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm saying in a way, one of the things with the guitar that I think is challenging is that sounds on the guitar are very stylistically evocative, right? Like if you play a Telecaster, it will, even for me, if I hear it, I think it leads you towards this sort of history of country music, right? If I hear a Stratocaster, I think, oh, that sounds like Jimmy or Stevie Ray or something like that, right? If I hear a jazz guitar, tenor saxophone doesn't lead you stylistically.
Right.
Oh, that sounds like jazz music. It's not like, oh, that sounds like 1945, you know, Coleman Hawkins record. You know what I'm saying? So I think in a way it gives us something to
I actually think that's what kind of turns me on the most about the guitar.
I do. I love it too. Absolutely. But in a way, I think about it like a Fender Stratocaster is just like it's like a piano, you know, it's a particular sound that has this very wide range of potential tones, really one of the widest, I think, in terms of low to high frequency, in terms of the depth of the waveform, you know, all of the overtones, all of the way that the five.
We're gonna do it later because it's, you know, I'm expecting 99% people are guitarists, but maybe my mom is watching this.
Yeah,
but I just got you know Gary Southwell, the guitar maker in the UK.
I don't.
So he made guitar for Bream and for, I mean, everyone, David Tenenbaum and the Mother. Gary Southwell,
Southwell, huh? Yeah, I
So
don't.
I got on the list. There's a list. You got to get on it. I was on the list for 8, 9 years or something.
Wow.
The guitar came. I mean, I think came like 8 months ago, and I'm in love. But we'll get to it. We'll get to it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot I want to talk about, but we could go all night. I want to talk about Mike. I mean, I also have a couple others on vinyl, but when this album came out, I heard it probably in retrospect. I was too young, but I'm assuming that you were 25-ish, more or less, and the whole universe tried to play like Michael Brecker.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming that this came out like, I mean, to talk about the impact that this guy had, I don't think there's the words for it. But Mike didn't play with a lot of guitarists. I mean, it's Stern and Metheny and Alan Rogers. And
Yeah, it's funny. I was on the phone with Stern yesterday, and we were talking a little bit about playing with Mike, and I was thinking about that. And I remember seeing one thing with him, I think playing with Mick Goodrick a little bit, but
yeah,
sort of famously the only two guitarists, aside from Brecker Brothers era, you know, Barry
yeah,
Finnerty,
Finnerty, of course.
but on his jazz E-er records, Mike and Pat, yeah.
So what was it like just kind of getting into that lineage? I mean, I would be terrified, but you know, let me put it a different way, because this is not the question for someone like you. But what is it like to follow a Michael Brecker solo?
That's very funny. I've talked to both Mike and Pat about that. It was intense, you know. It was one of the great experiences I've had as a musician. Because, you know, I mean, aside from all of the amazing saxophonistic and musical things that Mike did in a given solo, I oftentimes think of it, it was like a kind of standing next to like a nuclear furnace or something. It's just
Right.
this incredible amount of energy,
Yeah.
without even getting into the musical specifics. And then it would sort of, you know, still be burning, but it would sort of calm down. And then it was like, okay, what do you want to do? So it was, I mean, for the most part, it was tremendously inspiring. You know, it made me think about a lot of stuff. It made me dig really deep. You know,
It always seemed to me like he had an endless ways to express himself harmonically. I mean, it just seems like people always talk about technique, but just the richness that he had. It's really almost unprecedented.
yeah, he had an incredible understanding of music, and he was just ridiculous, you know. So it was really, really inspiring. And his, you know, there was an incredible energy and a great sense of joy in his playing, you know, that again, not going deeply into the musical specifics that, you know, one could talk about for
Forever.
a time with regard to Mike's playing, but you know, the power and energy and feeling of his playing was really, it was extraordinary, you know. And it was really palpable when you were on stage with him. You know, it was like this incredible force, and just very inspiring, man. You know, it was like, as you said, or, you know, to your question of what it was like to play a solo after him, you know, when you hear that kind of energy and you're involved with it and you're accompanying it, when you then think about what you want to play, or you know, to the extent that there's much thought at all that takes place, you can't help but be affected by that sound and by that energy, you know.
What
And
did it do to your
how are you
playing?
going to use it and express it? I'm sorry?
What did it do to your playing? A few years of that.
I think it made me it was probably one of the, most important sort of learning experiences that I had as a musician. I think my playing got better. I think, I don't know.
What
I
a
mean,
stupid question,
not
man.
objective, but it definitely was super, super inspiring. I mean,
I used to have Boris Koslov gave me a DVD that passed around
right.
a few of us from you guys from Tokyo
Mhm.
with Gil Goldstein and Sadownik and
Yeah.
Antonio. And it's really it's unbelievable to see, and the wide angles band has been very well documented, but I also had some bootlegs of you guys playing as a quartet, I think with Goldings and Idris, maybe? I mean,
Uh-huh.
one of the best bootlegs I've ever heard in my life, really, that band. And a lot of quartet with Clarence and Niels, and
King Doki, yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's quite extensive, the format that you guys worked in, and it's really an unbelievable combination.
Yeah.
And
I had such a blast playing with Mike, man. I mean, one of my favorite, I mean, there was obviously all of the sort of overt joy in accompanying him and playing solos. About I used to love doubling a melody with Mike, man. Woo! That
wow,
shit, I don't know. I mean, I've played with a lot of saxophonists, and I would say the same about Chris and Dave Binney, but each one of them has their particular tonal color and style, and there was something about, because Mike played, his pitch was
yeah, unbelievable, yeah,
perfect, and so playing those heads with him was just,
yeah.
loved that, man. It was like so great.
You guys, I mean, I have this recollection of hearing you guys play. I don't remember. I think it's called Timeline.
That tune.
I remember I was on the floor, just the melody before the solos or anything.
I know that was a fun tune to play with Mike, because he played drums really well, as you may know. He would
I don't think people realize that on all of your videos that you're playing along the drums, I think it's you playing.
Oh, my video? You're talking about me now? I was talking
Yeah,
about
are you
Mike.
confirming this or the
No,
video?
Mike's
Oh, yeah,
drum.
I know where you're going,
I
but
play drums too, yes. And I
and the first
used to do sound checks, and I would get on the drums and play with Mike. Mike would play saxophone, and I would play. He would get on the drums, and we, just that kind of stuff. But it was really interesting, like playing time on a cymbal with Mike, because of where his beat was.
yeah.
Man, it was deep. It was deep. His time. Patrick, about that.
Unbelievable, yeah.
His time was really extraordinary.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And so I'm putting that aside. I have a couple of Mythinis I was going to ask you about, but we're going to leave that for next time.
Okay.
I have Jim Hall. I have endless questions about Jim. I have some Miles. I have Pat Martino that I don't think people talk about enough. I want to talk about Wes. Last question for the day. I have a feeling that these two have a thing for you, and I'll tell you why. First of all,
that's my, well, especially Smoking at the Half Note, and the record that used to come with that, which was the thing with Johnny Griffin, the live stuff,
right.
from El Subo or whatever that club.
Yeah.
That was I used that as that was my instructional video.
So you have this sound on a much smaller guitar with a pick that I always thought comes in away from Wes.
I probably would agree, because when I started playing jazz, I played a full arch top. I mean, not an L5 one, like was one of those DeQuisto size, like Jim's thing, but made by Hagstrom. And I played with my thumb for the first 2 years that I.
Wow, I didn't know this.
Jazz, yeah. All I did was try to imitate Wes.
I didn't know this, because it's not as obvious in your language, in the notes, but this the sound. And another reason I brought up Smoking in the Half Note because there's almost no one that I don't think there's no one I can think of that can cook a rhythm section like you on guitar, to be honest.
Thank you.
And when I say that, what comes to mind for you? I mean, give me something to steal.
What comes to mind? You mean like how
I
do
mean, what's the mindset for you in a rhythm section as a guitarist? Because I don't think people realize that just to swing on a guitar is not a natural thing for a guitar to do.
Yeah.
And to make it speak in a rhythm section, I mean, I heard you play bird tunes that, I mean, or just impressions. The way you make a rhythm section kind of explode, it's very, 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 it's highest level of mastery.
Thank you, man. I don't know, I listen to the drummer a lot, I try to, I mean, if there's anything sort of conscious about it, I pay a lot of attention to where the ride cymbal is and try to connect with the sound of a drummer's ride cymbal, for one thing. And, I mean, I guess a big part of my language is sort of rhythmic, so I'd be happy in a way just sort of banging out rhythms without notes on a guitar, because my first instrument was drums. I started playing drums when I was like 5. So I think I hear things just as sort of pure rhythms, almost before I put notes to them. It's not that conscious as
Yeah.
What I mean, but I just the rhythmic rhythms are such an important thing in music, and it's something that I think for a long time when I was playing, I felt like I couldn't access certain things and rhythmically. And by this, I know this is a big topic, but when I would listen to like Herbie, right? And people who were influenced by Herbie, and I would hear, and this would happen when I played with Ed, or listened to Ed, like the way that pianists would get shit going with the rhythm section.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, or McCoy, when they play that thing like 3/4 and Elvin plays with him, and then it builds.
I was just going to talk about this for a while, but
right. So that
I always felt that you took a lot of the rhythmic. I don't think rhythmic is the right word. The way you polyrhythm your melody, and you're almost always able to coexist across a couple of meters. It's really unbelievable.
Well, I mean, that, the 60s Quintet was a massive influence and continues to be in terms of anybody of generation and any jazz musician after that group. So that was a huge, that record and Nefertiti and ESP and all of them. But I heard that going on in music for a long time before I was able to access it. And that meaning being able to sort of create across the bar line polyrhythms and things that would allow the drummer and the rest of the band to join in and then play off and create these sort of rhythmic tensions that then can resolve. You know what I mean? Like just that simple thing that, I mean, it's not simple in any way, but at the buildup of a McCoy solo in the Train Quartet, oftentimes they play sort of a 3/4 thing with chords, and then it would end and Train would come in, and it sounded like, it was like a volcanic eruption. But that kind of tension and rhythmic release was something that, was not a part of my playing, certainly when I first started. It took me a long time to understand what that was. And I initially understood it really just as sort of things I heard drummers do. And I could hear it completely, that sort of, I mean, Elvin, and then what the great Jeff Tain Watts introduced, in terms of quintuplets and all these kind of derivations of polyrhythms. And I figured it out after a while. I mean, figured it out.
What is
Meaning,
that? Give me something. This is what I'm here for. When you say, I'll give you two references that I, as a listener of hearing you countless times, had. What you can do coming into a solo or out of a solo. I'm thinking about Coltrane coming with the Afro blues solo after McCoy on Birdland, Live Birdland. And I'm thinking about Transition when he's soloing before McCoy and after McCoy. When he comes out of the McCoy solo, I mean, the world is exploding.
I understand exactly what
So when you say you figured it out,
I didn't figure that out. I mean, that's
Adam,
music in the mystical realm. If you're talking about transition, I never even tried to figure that out. But if you mean, what specifically do I mean by figured?
yeah.
Well, I mean, there was one gig I remember doing where I started playing some triadic things that I had never played before, and they sort of fell by virtue of the phrases that I was playing across the bar line. And it kind of, something opened up for me. And it became, I think, a big part of my language, and something that has continued to be part of my language. And it's basically like taking subdivisions, whether they're eighth notes or triplets, and putting accents in different places. So within those subdivisions, you're creating odd groupings of notes, right? So if you're playing eighth notes and you put an accent on the first note and the sixth note.
Let me, for anyone, for the civilians who are watching, I will say this. This is really the last shit I'm gonna bore you with tonight. Long ago and far away, I think all of us studied your solo on it. That kind of, for me, introduced what you're doing with what you just talked about. It's from Adam's first album, Out of the Invisible, and you can hear Everywhere and Get It Everywhere. And then as Adam's solo career became more and more well documented, it's everywhere. But when he's playing the trio things, both with Bill Stewart and with Clarence, he's able to do that in a way it's very, very intuitive, and it happens in a very natural way it's quite a marvel. So I urge all of you guys to check those albums. Adam, usually I toast to someone's new album, but I'm toasting to your. I mean, this is from a guy that myself and all my friends owe you such. I mean, there's no words to say this.
Thank you, man.
Well, what I gotten from you as a fan of music comes second only to the inspiration that I get from you as a human being. And I'm not going to even repeat the stories because you're going to get so embarrassed. But the character and just from watching you do and interact with me and other people, I've learned so much.
Thank you, Dekel.
So I'm going to wrap this up by saluting your next album. And we're sending you our love, you and Sumi. And I can't wait to see you in the real world when Zoom is behind us.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you, Dekel. Thanks for having me, man. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a ride. I've been made my whole week. So we'll talk real soon, Adam. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, Dekel.
All right.